right, everyone, I am going to get us started. Thank you all so much for joining us today to help us launch our toolkit, Mobilizing on the Right to Housing for Women and Gender Diverse People in Canada. My name is Stefania. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications at the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network, and I'm calling in from Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm going to pass it over to our wonderful co-chair of the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network, as well as chair of the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network, Marie McGregor Pitawanakwat, to open us up with a prayer today.
Ani bonjour watchie. Mani McGregor Pete Fonfoot Vision Across Doganing Donjabar Doga Dao. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie McGregor Pitawanakwat. I live in Doganing. In English, it's South Bay. I'm a Doga Kwe, which means South Bay woman. And I'm reading you from Manadominasing, called Manitoulin Island in English. It's in northeastern Ontario. And I've been asked to talk about the land acknowledgement. The Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network and the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network acknowledge and recognize that Canada is a settler colonial state on Turtle Island, which for generations has been governed and inhabited by Indigenous peoples practicing traditional ways of doing, knowing, and being. Our work acknowledges that the current homelessness crisis, disproportionately impacting Indigenous peoples, is a direct result of colonial and patriarchal policies that have dispossessed Indigenous peoples of our lands and homes, and commodified land and housing as profitable assets, leading to the concentration of wealth with a privileged few. That's the land acknowledgement. I turn now to our opening prayer. Jem Nado, Grove the Go, Sen Nego, Janad Moyang. Jem Nado, Grove the Go, Sen Nego, we know that Namang, Mampi, wa the Bajgade. Meanwhile, where in the Zinda Yon. Jem Nado, Grove the Sen Nego, Janin, Tuatwa, Mampi, e Yagit. Miwetch. And I'm still learning Mishnah and Win, so doing my best. And the greeting was, we ask for help with understanding and for listening and to being able to say things in a good way. And miigwech is thank you. And typically we say thank you. And I'll stop there and on to the next part.
Thank you so much, Marie. I'm so grateful to you for always leading us in a good way for these webinars and moments of learning. So just some quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to get out of the way. So our session today is recorded, right? Yes, it's recording. Please let me know if it's not. We're also committed to making this a safe space for everybody. In the chat, my colleague Khulud will be posting some resources, some sort of guidance around that safe space. Please use the chat to let us know if there's anything you'd like to say or if you have any questions. There will be at the very end a Q&A portion of this. And we are really, really excited to get to this point. For those of you who have been with us, you know this has been 2 years in the making, and we're kind of right at the precipice of some really exciting right to housing work. With that, I am going to actually, nope, that's still me. I'm going to introduce the Women's Housing Network. Sorry, I was in Ottawa this week and had a delayed flight, so my brain's still buffering a little bit. But the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network, for those of you who are not as familiar, we're one of Canada's leading national organizations focused heavily and working to eliminate homelessness and housing insecurity for women, girls, and gender diverse peoples across Canada through research, policy, advocacy, community engagement, human rights work, which is why we're here today, and strategic litigation. WIN is composed of a collective of diverse women and gender diverse folks, including those with lived expertise, and we have a little bit over 1,000 members right now. And I'm going to pass it over to Trinity, my colleague at our sister network, to introduce the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network.
Hi, everyone. My name's Trinity, and I am the lead of research and community engagement at the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network, which is a movement of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who are dedicated to improving the living situations of Indigenous women and girls, along with Two-Spirit and gender diverse persons across Turtle Island, and also ending incidents of becoming unsheltered. And all of our members have the lived experience of needing adequate shelter and a place to call home. And I will now hand it back over to Khulud.
Thank you so much, Trinity, for introducing the network. Thank you so much, Marie and Stefania, for getting us started. My name is Khulud Beg. I work as the Director, Community Engagement and Policy for the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. I am so happy to see so many people join today. It makes me couldn't like reaffirm my faith in the work that we've been doing for this past 2 years and for how long it's taken us to get here. We're here with the launch of the toolkit today, some good news about the review panel, and I'm really excited to share that with all of you. Before I get started, I do want to acknowledge that I'm joining today from Mokahentes, which is also called Calgary Treaty 7 Territory, Blackfoot Confederacy. So always grateful to be doing this work alongside some really powerful voices in our network and in our extended network through our membership. And I'll just get us started. So, most of you folks might already know that the right to housing in Canada was legislated in 2019. It was a really monumental moment for all of us folks that work in housing advocacy and have been working in housing advocacy, because particularly the right to housing was the first time ever that a socioeconomic right that Canada signs on to internationally was legislated domestically. It commits the Canadian government, the Canadian state, to progressive realization of the right to housing based on international human rights law, which is really critical and monumental for us. It also addresses systemic issues in housing rather than just looking at individual violations, which means systemic barriers and structural barriers that have led us to the crisis that we are in today is something that falls within the purview of the legislation, and that's something that the legislation looks at. It requires a rights-based strategy with goals, timelines, monitoring, and accountability. It is an accountability mechanism at the core of it, something that gets us asking questions directly to those who are responsible for making decisions and policies around housing. And then most importantly, and why we're all here today, is this right to housing legislation enables a submissions, hearings, findings, and systemic remedies mechanism in Canada. And for us, that is why we're here today, and that's the work that we're doing. Because in 2019, and I'll just click on to the next slide, which is this, hopefully this beautiful roadmap that we have. So we have the right to housing in Canada that ratifies our international responsibilities, Canada's international responsibilities. And it's really, really important to understand, and I love this quote, that we're not just talking about shelter that is provided by merely having a roof over one's head, or views shelter exclusively as a commodity. We're really talking about the right for someone to live somewhere in security, in peace, and in dignity. And when we talk about the human rights process and our participation in the human rights process, particularly from a gendered lens, that's really what we're looking at. Do women and gender diverse people have the agency and dignity to live in the ways that they want to live and where they want to live? We started off this work with preparing these two claims, one from the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network and one from the Women's National Housing Homelessness Network. And it was done through grassroots engagement, conversation with people from different regions all across Canada doing different kinds of work, people with lived experience, people that have been involved in their communities, providing supports, doing advocacy, coming together and articulating what is it that are the key violations that are impacting women and gender diverse people, particularly Indigenous women and gender diverse people all across Canada. We prepared these claims, and in 2022, when the Federal Housing Advocate was appointed under the National Housing Strategy Act, we submitted these claims to her, and these claims were reviewed. These claims were reviewed by the Federal Housing Advocate and were referred to the National Housing Council. We celebrated that moment sometime in May 2023, when we heard that the claims were referred to the National Housing Council with the intent that a national review panel be established on these claims. At some time earlier this year, we heard the intent to proceed from the National Housing Council on a 3-person review panel that is to be established this year, that's going to hear from women and gender diverse people from all across Canada who are to make submissions to this review panel and to articulate the housing violations that they're seeing in their communities, but also articulate solutions and accountability that they need to see from the government at different levels of government to get us out of the housing crisis, and particularly to address the unique impacts of housing insecurity and homelessness on women and gender diverse people. So as you can see on this roadmap, we're somewhere in step 3 right now. We're launching the toolkit today to get communities mobilized and engaged in the work on the human right to housing, with hopes that all of these submissions will be submitted to the National Housing Council review panel, who are then going to read through the submissions, prepare recommendations that will be submitted to the Minister of Housing. Under the legislation, the Minister of Housing has 120 days to respond back to the House of Commons and the Senate, and that's really where the power of the process is.
Sorry, just to
Perfect.
interrupt, can we spotlight the second interpreter? Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll just wait a couple of minutes while that happens, give myself a breather as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, Steph. So as I was speaking, we heard earlier this a couple of months ago that the National Housing Council has published its intent to proceed with a national human rights inquiry into Government of Canada's failure to prevent and eliminate homelessness among women and gender diverse people. And this is a really big deal. It's taken us 2 years to get here, and we've kept on with the process. We've kept an eye on the process. We've kept the communities engaged. We've made a really significant efforts to keep people involved. We heard from the community that one of the biggest things that they need as they're engaging with this process is something that can help them along the way and something that can inform their engagement. And that's sort of where the idea of this toolkit, while we're gathered today, came from. So the good news is that we've heard the intent to proceed from the National Housing Council, and we really are hoping to see a public announcement of this review panel. It's going to be a 3-person review panel, and seeing the establishment of the terms of reference and eventually a portal that's going to open submissions from the public to the review panel. Next slide, please. So what happens when the review panel is established? Once the review panel is established, we will have an opportunity to participate as folks that are involved in housing advocacy, but also anyone that has lived and living experience, anyone that would want to bring their piece forward to the review panel. The review panel will have an opportunity for us to participate in through written submissions, through oral submissions, and as well through just engaging and creating capacity within our community to do advocacy on housing. So the review panel really is an opportunity for us to get organized and bring together a concerted voice on gender and housing to the panelists, and through the panelists process to the Government of Canada. Next slide, please. And the evidence building process for the review panel is really anything and everything that can contribute to making the case that women and gender diverse people are particularly marginalized when it comes to housing insecurity. When we were thinking about putting together this toolkit, and when we were consulting folks on this toolkit, one of the things that we heard over and over again is we want to make sure that people can participate in whatever way makes the most sense to them, whether that's through stories and narratives, whether that's through bringing research or statistical evidence, whether that's through legal expertise in human rights law or specific jurisdictional expertise, pointing to the role that different systems and governments have to play in making this housing, in addressing this housing crisis, and also manufacturing this housing crisis to some extent. We wanted to make sure that people have an opportunity to participate in whatever makes sense to them. And when we were putting together this toolkit as a guide and a resource for communities to participate, we really had this evidence building process in mind. And how can we make sure that all different types of diverse expertise has an opportunity to present their input and their submissions to the review panel? So really just kind of emphasizing and reiterating again how critically important it is for us to have this diverse expertise be engaged in the review panel, but most importantly, create pathways for lived experience to be involved in ways that make the most amount of sense to them. Next slide, please. So we put together this toolkit, and this toolkit has come forward from lots of engagement with our human rights task force, folks that sit on the human rights task force, but also other community engagements that we've done since the announcement of the claims in 2022 up until now. The toolkit really is this accessible guide for anybody to just pick up and run with the review panel process. It could be you as an individual wanting to make a submission. It could be you wanting to involve and engage community members in your community to get involved with the review panel. And it could also be you at an organization or at an entity involving staff, frontline staff, making submissions. So really, at the end of the day, the goal of the community toolkit is to enable anybody that's interested in making a submission to have all the tools, resources, information, and guide to make that submission. And that's what we're hoping to bring to you today as the community. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it to Trinity now, who's going to be specifically speaking to NIN's approach and the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network's approach in facilitating the engagement with the review panel and how the toolkit is to facilitate that piece for them as well.
Thanks, Khulud. So the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network will be actively organizing and providing support to mobilize Indigenous-led engagements with the review panel. And this initiative is not just about gathering feedback, it's also about empowering our communities to take a very central role in the decision-making processes that directly affect their housing needs. So a significant aspect of this effort involves contacting and doing outreach to Indigenous groups and organizations. So the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network will reach out to various Indigenous communities, ensuring they are informed and engaged in the discussions regarding housing solutions. This outreach is crucial as it really does lay the groundwork for an inclusive dialogue. And we aim to foster a collaborative atmosphere where everyone's voice is not only valued, but also heard. And by inviting these groups to participate in discussions about how to utilize the toolkit effectively and how to be a part of the review panel. And this helps ensure that the toolkit is not just a document, but it's also a living resource that evolves with the communities it serves. Additionally, the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network will actively encourage individuals to serve as community champions, which we'll get into more detail about later on in the presentation. But these champions will be vital in promoting the initiative within their communities. They will essentially act as representatives to help disseminate information regarding the toolkit and also engage more individuals in the conversation surrounding housing. And by empowering community champions, we're not only building capacity within our communities, but we're also fostering leadership among individuals who can advocate for housing solutions tailored to their cultural contexts. And at NIN, we aim to partake in a very proactive approach to ensure that Indigenous voices are at the forefront of discussions regarding their housing needs and aiming to lead to more effective and community-driven outcomes. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Marie.
Okay, thank you, Trinity. Much appreciated. So what this is about is the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network's approach to review panel engagement. So there's a few very important principles that we want to keep in mind. The first one is respect for Indigenous traditions using Indigenous protocols. And these can vary from one province to another, from one nation to another, and even from one community to another. So we'll do our very best to understand what the custom is there and try to follow it in terms of how to connect with people and ask them to participate. Also, if needed, we would like to meet with Indigenous peoples one-on-one. And I understand that some folks are not comfortable in even small groups like 8 to 10 people or groups that are like 25 to 30 people. So when needed, we can arrange to meet with people person to person. Another important component is that we want to provide safe spaces for community members to discuss possible sensitive issues. So the story about their own inadequate housing or precarious housing or homelessness may still be very close to the heart and very grief-driven. And some folks may carry a lot of emotion about it. And so we want to be able to provide resources that will help folks tell their stories in safe spaces. So that's what that's about. And then we want to provide resources directly to individuals to make sure that they're supported throughout the process. So not everyone needs exactly the same package of information. It'll be tailored to what they're used to seeing or working with or what they're accustomed to using. So we'll try and tailor those to the groups or the individuals as we go through this. So those are our approaches to review panel engagement. And like Trinity says, we'll reach out over the next months to meet with people, explain this to them, and ask them if they're willing to tell their stories and add their testimony to the human rights claims. So that's in a nutshell. Thank you so much, and on to the next.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marie and Trinity. And we're actually so fortunate to have this team as a sister network and functioning as sister networks doing this review panel process, because recognizing how absolutely critical it is to have Indigenous-led voices and approaches in all of this work, and having it being guided by Marie's wisdom is truly, we're really fortunate to have been doing this work in this way. The toolkit, as Marie and Trinity have also articulated, is an opportunity for us to really take the human rights process and materialize it and make it real for folks. We write this in the toolkit, and when you see the toolkit, you'll see it. We see the human rights process as fundamentally a relationship building process. It's about walking alongside people that have unique housing experiences and that are impacted by the housing crisis in various different ways. It's about talking to friends, family, community members, local political representatives, online networks, to build a community or an alliance of individuals who collectively recognize that there is a violation of housing rights, particularly impacting women and gender diverse people in their community. And most importantly, the toolkit is to facilitate right holders that are interested in mobilizing the right to housing and interested in identifying other folks that would like to walk alongside them. So the toolkit we've prepared is this handy guide that you can use and bring to life in your community to get people involved in the right to housing process and have this sort of representation from your community, from your locality in the right to housing process. So ensuring that collective voice from all across coast to coast to coast is something that's so central to the work that we've done and the toolkit that we've prepared. Next slide, please. So like I was saying earlier, who can benefit from the toolkit? The toolkit's meant to guide anyone that's interested in participating in the Human Rights Review Panel. You can participate as an individual, you can mobilize a group of community members to make a submission, or you can make a submission on behalf of a group. All of the resources to facilitate that are present in the toolkit. And additionally, the toolkit identifies places where the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network and the National Indigenous Housing and Homelessness Network can play a particular role in supporting your submission and your engagement. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, we have prepared the toolkit in 2 sections. It has background information on what it is that we're working with, what involves engaging in the human rights process, what is the human right to housing in Canada, why is it important? And the second section is this really usable, tangible guide to how do we get going in our community? How do we get started? What information do we need? How do we talk to other people? Can we engage other advocates in our community? How do we craft a submission? How do we engage the media? And this is kind of where Steph has done this phenomenal job of preparing a media guide for people that are interested in engaging your local newspapers or your local media outlets, whether that's TV or radio. How do you pitch to them, and how do you get a housing movement started in your locality? We're really strongly focused on making sure that everybody and anybody that wants to engage and build a housing movement for women and gender diverse people in their community are able to do it, and they're able to walk alongside other people as they do it. You'll also see that we've developed these little icons in the toolkits that provide you downloadable templates, so you can go ahead and print a template and take it out into the community if you have to. You can use that in your workspace if you're somebody that works on the front line. You can use that to talk to people, talk to individuals. If you're a peer support worker, that's something that you can use. We also have an icon to identify external resources, research resources, or other helpful resources that we've identified. And as well, we've identified places in which you can directly get in touch with the Women's Network or the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network, and we would be able to come to your aid, and we would be able to walk along with you in helping you make submissions and engage with the review panel. Next slide, please. I'll pass it off to Steph now, because one of the things that kind of attaches to the toolkit is the Community Champion Program, and that's something that we're launching today alongside our toolkit as well. So Steph, take it away.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so I'm just being wary of the time because there's also something else that we're launching today once I move through this piece. And I kind of feel like this Community Champion Program, we're sort of teasing it out today more than anything else. And I imagine there will be questions around it that we can address today. So, one of the main purposes of today is that we're getting the toolkit out there. We're starting this Community Champion Program so that when, and quite shortly, we expect this to happen very quickly, when the review panel releases its terms of reference, which will give us the framework of how this whole thing is going to look, the timelines, when the submission portals will open, when public hearings will happen. The reason we're kind of getting ahead of that is because we really wanted to get people thinking about it, familiar with what we're able to offer, so that when all of these portals and deadlines start happening, we're ready to go. We have no time to waste. We're going. You can tell we're very excited. So the Community Champion Program is an opportunity for those with lived or living experience of homelessness or housing insecurity to participate in the evidence building process through doing outreach in their community. We expect, and as we've seen in the review panel that happened last year, a lot of partners get together, a lot of folks, organizations like us, from grassroots to national to regional, do a lot of great work, but we wanted to take it a step further and make sure that we're empowering lived experts of homelessness or housing insecurity to be able to do some of this work and receive compensation, receive training. We're trying to, with this toolkit, provide as much support as we can as a tiny team of 2 it win and 2 it nin. So we're really, making it work as we go. So we really also want to encourage participation from diverse regions and groups. When together with NIN, we're setting this up. And we're going to be sharing a sign-up form in the chat shortly, so that it's a very easy Google form to kind of get in and get started. We're looking to prioritize diversity in the selection process through rural, remote, and urban regions. We want to see intersectional representation, obviously including Indigenous folks, racialized, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse individuals. Women, Two-Spirit, gender diverse folks with lived or living experience of homelessness or housing and precarity as well. The commitment from our side and from the Community Champion side is that they will receive training from NIN and WIN, And through this training, learn how to sort of demonstrate respect for stories and experience of those with living experience of homelessness or housing insecurity. I think we all come into this from very different times in our lives, very different places. And I think we just want to ensure that through the training that folks are ready to go out into the community and listen. They have the tools to do that. There will be value add because we don't want this to be an extractive process. So through a lot of fundraising, we've able to get some funding so that we can recognize not only the time of the community champion, but also provide incentives for the folks who are providing their testimony and their stories, because we always want to be mindful and respectful of that in a non-exploitative way, and making sure that when we're collecting that evidence and testimony, that people also understand that this isn't for some study or for some research. This is really targeted towards getting the policy needed, the funding, the money, the federal decision making required to meaningfully address the homelessness crisis for women and two-spirit and gender diverse folks across Canada. So as a community champion, you will receive training on the toolkit from both WIN and NIN. You will receive a stipend when you mobilize up to 5 community members to make a submission to the review panel. You will have access to supports and resources from WIN and NIN to do that outreach, and then also participate in the oral hearings along with other community members. So this is sounding really big, and that's why we wanted to get ahead of it and use the time that we have now into when we start learning more about what the oral hearings and public hearings process will look like with the review panel. And we do have more information to this. Again, that's kind of why I was saying we're sort of teasing this out right now. So we'll allow time for Q&A to address if anyone has more questions around it, but also training will also address a lot of those questions as well as we go into it. So the next part of the presentation, I'm very, very excited for. Oh, yes, sorry. Before I jump into that, so just making sure everyone understands that to get into becoming a community champion, there is the Google form in the chat that you can click onto and begin to fill out. We're also going to share that form publicly. So if you don't get to it today, that's perfectly all right. We'll be sharing it across our social media channels, newsletter, everything like that. I do also encourage folks to sign up to our human rights updates mailing list. I'll also share that information when I talk about what I'm launching next. And once you're registered, you will be hearing from us. We'll be reviewing registration. As I said earlier, we just want to ensure that we're getting diverse representation from across Canada, but we're always open. You can always email us directly as well to get insights on if you don't hear from us right away when you've registered. We are working on a very transparent process, and we're going to be moving quickly. So we're very, very excited to begin this. Okay. Now, as I got ahead of myself, we're also launching our website today. So as a small team of the 5 of us, we were like, you know what we should do? We should not only make this toolkit, we should also build a website to make it even more accessible for the people we care about, for community champions, for our partners, for communities across Canada who want to claim their right to housing. So I'm just quickly going to stop sharing, and I'm actually going to take you to the website now. Okay. So here is our actual website. This has been a lot of work for our team, and we're so excited to be able to share it with you today. It's genderhousingjustice.ca. So you could go to it right now. It is live. It is not perfect. As I was mentioning earlier, our main focus today is getting the toolkit out into the public, getting community champions starting to think about whether or not they want to engage with this process at that level and be able to sign up, get our partners sort of the resources that we've built to make it happen. So I quickly wanted to get folks through to let you know what's available on the website today and what will be available soon. So at genderhousingjustice.ca, we have set it up so that there's a little bit of education, but essentially what this is it is our living, breathing toolkit. So we essentially took our toolkit and threw it up onto a website. So you're going to be able to download the toolkit today on this website. It's available in both English and French. By early next week, we will also have a plain text version to make sure that it's also accessible for folks who, even though these toolkits were designed with accessibility in mind, as far as colors, as far as readability, we have also been informed that it's also really great to have that in just plain text format. So I just wanted to flag for those of you to know that that is coming by early next week. We also have the community champion form here as well, and a little bit more information. So this is also where you can come online. And if you don't do it today, you know you can do it whenever, because this website is here to stay, and you can come here to fill out that form and find out more. We also have our human rights claims available, and then this is going to be populated quite a bit. So you can come on here today, get background on our human rights claims, also learn a little bit more about the incredible review panel members who will be leading this work that we're so excited to work with. I apologize, I'm a mad scroller. So I just wanted to break down that you can go to our Make a Submission page, and essentially it steps you through how to make a submission, because obviously right now the portals aren't open to make a direct submission. That will be incoming, and when that happens, we will be constantly updating this website to always make sure it is ready with all the latest information and access points throughout the review panel process. So it's broken down here. Again, this is really like the toolkit just on a website. You know, what you can consider when developing your submission, key issues, gathering evidence. We have our consent forms. We also have on our resources page here all of the breakdown of all of our templates, our documents. Yeah, here, just wanted to scroll to this point. Everything is available in English and French. We really want to make sure that it's coast to coast to coast. We also have pulled a lot of our research to support your claims in that process. We have an FAQ page, question and answers. We have a testimony page where we will, as our partners and folks start submitting testimony when the portal's open, that's where we're going to have people so you can reference and see what's been put forward so far and that kind of thing. We'll have information about, you know, the deadlines, how often portals or how long portals are open for, when public hearings are happening. So this will be a space that is always updated, always has the freshest information about, contact, and join us, of course, because what's a website without those pieces? So I'm just really excited. I just wanted to show this to you folks today. And just show that our toolkit is available in not only as the toolkit, not only in English and French, but as a website as well, because why not? Accessibility is key, and we're just trying to use everything available to us to make that happen. Yeah.
And I would just actually quickly add stuff to that piece. One of the biggest things that we realize is within our team of two at the Women's Network and the team of two at the National Indigenous Housing Network, and then obviously our chair Arlene, as well on the Women's Network side, we are very limited in where we can be and how much we can be, and recognizing that the intersectionality of this process goes so far beyond us. The Community Champion program really is to incorporate that intersectionality right into the process to ensure that anyone and everyone that can possibly participate has the opportunity, has the ability, has the resources, has the training to participate. This goes to not just intersectionality in terms of like the different walks of life that people come from, but also just thinking about languages. Like I realized that English and French is not the only language that people want to participate in. So training people from the community to be able to participate in evidence gathering and be able to have all the tools to gather stories from people and submit them, it's so critical to us, and it's so critical for us to recognize that we are so limited in ourselves, and that we really need the help of the community to make this process real. All of this work, the toolkit, the website, is our effort to ensure that we have representation from everybody all over the place that wants to participate, having the means and resources to participate. And that's just the really critical point that I wanted to make about all of this. It really is just recognizing that we can't do everything, but I'm sure that we can have other people that can do a lot alongside us. And how can we enable and ensure that that's a possibility?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Khulud. And just to build on that, we're only as strong as our partners and our friends and neighbors and community members and grassroots groups who are in the room with us, who are working and walking alongside of us. So this is the beginning of another long process. Don't we love those? It's been 2 years in the making, but I feel like we're actually starting to see all that work finally come together. And I also just wanted to give a huge shout out to our co-chairs, Marie and Arlene, and our steering committee members and our human rights task force and partners like the National Right to Housing Network, who we've been working with so closely in the last 2 years, who have made all of this happen. So I also hope those folks feel ownership of this toolkit, of this website, of all this work that is happening. So we're going to move into the question and answer. I'm going to look at the chat, but please feel free to raise your hand, and I'm going to go through the chat if questions have been posted there and bring them forward to the group. And just in case any questions around the slide deck or the webinar recording, yes, all of this will be available and sent to all, not just the folks who registered for today's webinar, but for our newsletter subscriber lists, and we'll be posting it publicly as well. So I'm going to move into the questions, and I see Tara, your hand up. Please go ahead.
This is absolutely amazing. I'm so excited. As always, I have to advocate for my community. I notice you do not include disability in your intersectionality. And our community has been hit very, very hard by the housing crisis. Do you have any plans to add disability to this
Absolutely.
wonderful work?
Absolutely, Tara. And I'm sorry, like it's not that we don't include it. It's just that we haven't gone ahead and described we didn't go ahead and describe our intersectionality in the presentation slides that we made, but within the toolkit and within on the website, all of it is really clearly laid out. It's people with, like, when we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about folks at multiple different intersections, whether that's people with disabilities, people that are on different forms of income assistance, people that are currently navigating multiple different systems, whether that be child apprehension system or the criminal legal system. Like, our definition of intersectionality cuts through a lot of these areas and recognizes that people could be at multiple of these intersections at the same time. So I really do apologize. I did not, we kind of kept it kind of technical for this presentation just in the interest of time, but the toolkit itself and all of the resources available on our website do go into a lot more detail on these. I also wanted to point out that the toolkit is going to be available in a plain text version as well for accessibility, and as well the design of the toolkit was done through an accessible design firm. So just the choices that we've made in terms of text and the organization of the content in the toolkit really has that at the top of mind. We're going to record this webinar. It's going to be available on our YouTube for people to view later with the ASL and closed captions. So if like I said, like, I think if there's anything that we can do within our resources, our goal is to make that happen. Wherever we're limited, we really are relying on community champions to come get that training and get the help and support from us to do the work on their terms and make it happen in the way that makes most sense for their community. So I really just want to emphasize that we do not go into the details of fully articulating the groups and populations that we serve, but lay assured that it does exist in our toolkit and in all of our information and the work that we've done, the research we've built. And it really does hope to cater people that are at these multiple intersections, because they're so deeply interconnected with housing. So I really hope that the resources that we put out, the toolkit, the website, does communicate that well to people.
And I'll just quickly build on that. Kate beat me to it in the chat, but one of our incredible partners, the Accessible Housing Network, and Kate herself is on our Human Rights Task Force,
Hi, Kate.
has been there with us. We are also going to be she and I have been in the background planning a webinar to specifically focus on the folks through the Accessible Housing Network to learn about the toolkit, what their needs are to make sure it's accessible to them. So that's something that's an ongoing process as well, because nothing's ever going to be perfect out the gate as much as I wish it was. So, but that's such an important question, and I thank you for raising it so we could address that now. But I will say we will be promoting that webinar once we have that booked and good to go. And then moving forward, if you ever find that there are barriers to whatever you're trying to access, that's ours. Please reach out to us directly because we're very keen to work on bridge that to make sure it's not a barrier. Yeah,
Thank you very much for your very thoughtful answer. I appreciate that.
for sure. Thank you for asking. I don't see any questions in the chat. Would anyone else have any questions? Please feel free to raise your hand, or we might be finishing early today. Well, at least at the very least, I mean, I hope folks know that many of you already have our emails. info@womenshomelessness.ca is another email you can use. Oh, Khalud, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up a comment from the chat from C. Will there be particular focus on the huge impact of financialization of rent stack across Turtle Island is having on particularly on young lone parent Indigenous life givers with children who are shut out of the market? And this is from an income and racial status as well. So I do you want to like take a stab at it, Steph? Should I go ahead? Trinity or Marie, feel free to jump in if you folks want to, but just I'll get us started, Steve, and respond saying that we really recognize the like financialization when we were writing the human rights claim was actually quite front and central in both of our claims. We've addressed it from an Indigenous perspective in the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network's claim, and then there's also analysis on it in the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network claim. We are so acutely aware of how it's impacting women and gender diverse people and how it's keeping them out of the housing market, but also more importantly, how it's actually impacting the very fabric of their families and their ability to be with their kids. So it's quite front and central. We are really hoping that this is, we had a financialization human rights review that was done by the National Housing Council already. We're going to draw on those findings. We're going to draw on some of that work. And we're really hoping that people from the community also bring this forward, specifically talking about the gendered impact of this, because I know for sure that this is one of the key core critical issues that is impacting and shaping housing in Canada right now, and there's no way that we're not going to gloss over it. So, I do think that the review panel, the strength of the review panel, is what people bring forward, and our goal and hope really is to amplify some of these particular trends through the submissions and through the work that we do and the support that we provide in community as well. I think Hillary Marks also has a question as well, and there's some others coming in through the chat.
I did. I just had I noticed that in nowhere, except you did mention it near the end, Khulud, about peer support, and I just wanted to know, is that more in the toolkit regarding the structure of how we'll be using peer support within this toolkit?
So the goal really was, Hillary, to with the community champion program, anybody that has lived or living experience of housing insecurity or homelessness to be able to participate in this training and be able to mobilize submissions or mobilize folks in their community to participate in the review panel. I identified that so many people are doing this kind of work as peer support workers on the front line. So emphasizing peer support essentially was to ensure that those people also have the opportunity to participate in this program, because I know for sure that this is a role that often has lived or living experience and is also contributing in their community through providing support. So we wanted to just open that door and extend that offer to folks that are already doing this work to come and participate in the program and get this training.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Khalud.
Oh, I was gonna just, there's another question in the chat. When you use the word claim, is this referring to key messages or a more structured submission that you made? So Anita, we made 2 structured claims. They're written up and posted on the Women's Network website. I'll just quickly post the link in the chat as well. You can read them, you can share them with other folks. It's the stuff that started this process off. So we submitted these very initial claims in 2022 to the Federal Housing Advocate, who then reviewed it and referred them to have a review panel established. So the review panel is coming directly from the claims that were submitted, and the claims kind of set off this process. And I saw that Steph just posted the link to the claims as well. You'd be able to find it on our Gender Housing Justice website as well. Another question, what is the timeline for choosing the community champion? What is the deadline for submission to the panel? Maybe Steph, you can take that one on.
Sure. Timeline for community champions. We're starting that process today, and then we will be sort of continuing to promote it and engaging and gathering, letting folks know that that's a possibility and that it's happening. Once we have a better idea of when, how many folks are interested and want to participate, we'll start planning trainings. I don't think it'll be like we do one training and then that's it. Like I think it's going to be a very fluid, ongoing process. As far as submissions to the review panel itself, that is going to be announced, we've been told, very soon, potentially this month, in the next couple weeks. When the review panel announces what's called a terms of reference, that reference includes the specific questions that they're going to be asking and the scope. It's going to include what kind of testimony that they're interested in gathering, whether, sort of details around what written submissions they are looking to get, what oral testimony or public hearings will look like. They'll also, within that, let us know the timelines. So there will be, I imagine, several months from when they open up the portal to receive written submissions, a few months until there's a deadline. So we don't have that timeline yet until the review. We're waiting on the review panel to release that information. So as far as the community champions, we're opening that portal or that Google form up today. We'll be paying close attention to it, and then we'll be in communications with those folks while we're also promoting the process to make sure people know about it. I hope that answers your question. And I just see, Hillary, your hand up if you wanted to go ahead.
I think you're muted, Hillary, because we can't hear you.
Sorry. No. Are you going to pay us for going as a community champion on the streets of Calgary? And are you going to pay our participants?
Yes, so there is compensation available for both, Hillary, community champions and participants. So once we start bringing people in and start training them, there is going to be a stipend attached to the community champion program, and then there's honoraria attached to participants. And I just also wanted to quickly address in this line Lucy's question in the chat. Can a community champion be an organization, or do you envision people with lived or living experience, or both? Ideally, it is people with lived or living experience, Lucy. That's where we're going to be prioritizing. That's where we see this time, capacity, and energy going. Having said that, it's not to say that the person with lived or living experience cannot be affiliated with an organization. That's totally fine. But our first priority would be folks that self-identify with having lived or living experience, because we see that to be a very, very critical component of this rollout and this work.
And
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add that while we're working with community champions to make sure we're supporting them, we're also going to be working with organizational partners in another formal sense to support them and work with them, get a sense of what kind of submissions they're thinking about as well. In this time, I would also recommend checking out housingrights.ca, the National Right to Housing Network, to learn a lot about the financialization review panel, because they, on their website, have posted what written testimony looked like for that review panel that happened last year. So it's really testimony and submitting evidence is open to everyone. The community champion model is just making sure we're getting to folks with lived or living experience, peers, to make sure they're supported to do that work as well. Because, you know, when you're working at an organization, you're getting paid generally, hopefully, to do this type of advocacy and work.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to build on that.
I think this is a quick last question from Alina, and I wanted to get to this because I think it has some we have some relevant information we can share with you, Alina. So you're specifically asking about what can I refer to in regards to what has been done in regards to training for building housing and current builders for housing building in ways that comply to the wants of Indigenous people and also accessible and universal design. So Alina, actually, the team at the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network is currently working on this amazing project called Alternative Builds that is specifically looking at sustainable ways of building and construction. And Marie and Trinity, if you're okay, I can share your email with Alina and she can be directly in touch with you folks. But I would highly recommend getting in touch with Marie or Trinity. You can even email us on our info email and we can like stream that information over to them. But there is work being done on particularly alternative builds and Indigenous-led builds in housing construction. And I'm happy to pass information for Marie and Trinity over to you. And hopefully that can be helpful. And hopefully you can use that in building a submission as well.
Hi, it's
I'm
Marie.
freezing.
Oh, go ahead, Marie.
I just wanted to respond
Just
to
cold. I know.
I think somebody's unmuted here. 1 second. Okay, go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to an earlier question about Indigenous women-led families and difficulty accessing housing, social housing. The backdrop to that is in 1876, the federal government passed legislation called the Indian Act, where it decided who could be registered as an Indian, where you could live, what you could do, when you could leave, and if you decided you wanted to go to school or join the army, you had to give up your rights to be an Indian. So where that came from was the treaties between Indigenous nations and the British Crown or the French or the Spanish or the Portuguese. And so the backdrop is that Indigenous peoples are sovereign nations still, because the treaties have not been undone. And so if the terms of the treaties are not met, they become null and void. And if that happens, then the lands revert to Indigenous peoples. And so what that leads to is that Indian reserve lands in Canada now only constitute 1/3 of 1% of the total land mass. What is the size of the total land mass? 9,985,000 square kilometers of land from coast to coast to coast. It is the second largest land mass in the world. The only one larger is Russia. And so my observation about this is, how is it that we have such an extensive land mass and not any Indigenous people are homeless or precariously housed when we are home on our own homelands? And so what needs to happen is to have that backdrop taken into account when we're talking about emergency shelters or transitional housing or shelters for Indigenous women and families, or even for looking at tent villages and how do we address those. Anyone who sets up a tent to live in because they have no housing, they're exercising agency and independence and self-reliance. And so a group of tents together is not an encampment. It's a tent village. It's a tent community. People have gotten together in order to A, take care of themselves, and B, start to take care of each other. And so the tent is the immediate answer to shelter, and then other types of shelter is the next immediate. But what really needs to happen is, how do we create housing for individuals who need housing today, not next year or not 2 years from now? And that's the challenge that's in front of us. That's the challenge that's in front of me as the chair of the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network and as the co-chair of the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. Every discussion I enter has to help me to see, how do we get to the end of seeing people housed? That's the objective. And I just wanted to add that to bring flavor to our discussion. And I really do want to say I appreciate everything that Khulud and Stefania and Trinity and Arlene have contributed to both the networks. It's very difficult work, very challenging work, and I'm so happy to see that we have a process and that there is a website. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. And these are powerful, powerful words to end with. The last piece really is to kind of close us off today. And I'll pass it back to you, Marie. I think you've said some really powerful things already. We're coming to an end. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining. We will be in touch. This is ongoing work. This webinar is going to sit on our YouTube page. The website's available. The toolkit's available. We really hope to hear back from folks. If you have any other questions we haven't addressed, please do get in touch with us at info@womenshomelessness.ca. I'll pass it back to you, Marie. And I just want to thank the Women's Network team, the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network team, our steering committee, our Human Rights Task Force, and all of the other people that come together and make this happen. Thanks so much, folks. Back to you.
Okay, I want to leave you with one word, but I'll say it 4 times. And one of the ways that we start to recover is, as Indigenous peoples, we need to start behaving like hosts in our own homeland. And so education goes both ways. And one of the words I want to leave you with is miigwech. So I'll say it 4 times. Miigwech, 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 miigwech. And in Anishinaabe, that is thank you. So if things you want to take away today, add that one word to it. And next time we meet, maybe I'll hear from you and you'll use that word for us. And what that means is I thank you all for participating today. I see that we had representation from across the country. I see also that we have had assistance from our beings in the cosmos, those from the spirit world, and we have had assistance from those underneath, our ancestors underground, and we have had assistance from all of our relatives, the trees, the plants, the animals, the birds and the fish, and the shrubs and the creepy crawlies and all those beings. So we're all family. And miigwech, it's been a good day, and we look forward to the next steps and forward and onward in a good way. Now,
Miigwech, Marie. Miigwech, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch and take care. Have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.